So, hi everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of Supply Chain Talk. My name is Duncan Brock. I'm a director at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and I've got the pleasure of hosting Supply Chain Talk and the discussions around it. Every week we choose a different theme. So last week we focused on supply chain skills for the future and the different skill sets that people would need going forward. This week, the real focus is on supply chain and sustainability in this distribution section of supply chain. So looking at the different aspects of that, and we're going to have a very interesting panel discussion around the discussions around the topic about the challenges that people are facing, but some great ideas, hopefully, of the sort of things that people can put forward and take forward in that area. I have 3 guests joining me, all of whom got some real level of expertise and knowledge in this area, and hopefully bring that to life for us as we go forward. For those of you who haven't joined Supply Chain Talk before, those who are live, please do participate. We've got a chat function, and I've already seen a number of people who are starting to post in there. So welcome to Ferdinand from Uganda. So welcome to you. I'm sure others will join as well. John from London, and Trudy's there. We've got Benjamin from Oman. So great to have you all joining us today. So thank you for that, and please do participate in the chat. We also have the Q&A function as well. So any of you who've got specific questions you want to ask, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll try and make sure that as we go through the session, you have enough time to ask the questions of our great guests that we've got here today. The other thing we do as a bit of an incentive is any of you who really do want to join in, that we have a great Supply Chain Talk mug, which is unique. Well, not quite unique. There's a few around now, but not many. But if you would like to get your hands on a Supply Chain Talk mug, I would decide at the end of the session who's actually had the best question or comment, and we'll award that at the end, and it'll get its way through to you. So that's Supply Chain Talk. So welcome, and really good to have you all joining us here today. Let me bring on our first guest. It's Nico van den Berg from Electrolux, who's the distribution process lead for Europe. So Nico, if you could sort of join, it'd be great for you to sort of participate in this session today. So welcome to you. If you could also turn your microphone on, that'd be even better. I made the same mistake at the beginning as well, but we can hear you now. It's okay. So Nico, welcome to you.
It should be on.
It's okay. It wouldn't be a broadcast on some sort of screen without somebody having a mic problem. I think we've lived with those for the last 2 years now. So, but welcome to you. I gave your title as distribution process lead for Europe, but maybe a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move on and have a discussion about the news story.
Yes. Yeah. No, again, thanks for the introduction. Nico van den Berg. I'm Dutch, and I'm responsible with Electrolux for distribution in Europe. Distribution from our local RDCs towards our customers as the big franchises of the retail suppliers as MediaMarkt and Darty and that kind of shops. Electrolux, and you see it in my background, also AEG, those are brands of Electrolux company, and we provide our households with appliances as vacuum cleaners, but especially washing machines and refrigerators, so the white goods stuff. A little bit background from mine personally. I'm coming from a system transporter like the big DHL and the GLS and the TNT, and I step over to the other side of the table, and I'm now with a big shipper. Being responsible for distribution in Europe means that I have several reports in Europe who are solely responsible for the local distribution toward our customers in that area or country. Within my job, the biggest focus points are at the moment track and trace, paperless distribution, so also connected to sustainability, and of course sustainability itself as a whole. And then within distribution, we especially look, like I already said, on paperless, but also on rail distribution. We do a lot, and e-trucks. And especially on that last subject, the focus is there. Also for out of our management team, and I mean not only my management, so within logistics, but also on a high level, the focus is on developing our network in a more sustainable way within distribution, and primarily focusing on the possibility of the e-trucks in Europe.
That's great. Thank you, Nico. And I'm sure the insight you've got from shipping sort of major appliances around Europe is going to be very useful when we start to bring that to life as we go into the discussion around some of the challenges and some of the opportunities we've got for making a difference in there. Before we get on to the specific discussions though on sustainability in distribution, every week we try and choose a topical news story. And I think every week there's lots of news stories about supply chain, as we know at the moment. But this week we're sort of picking up one, and it's really focusing on this food supply chain. But actually, there's a number of themes in here that I think, as we go forward, would like to sort of get your thoughts and your views on, really, because this is a UK challenge about facing a food supply chain crisis. But I know that crisis is everywhere across Europe in terms of the food supply chains. And I think it's a really interesting piece of the challenges all supply chains are facing, because at the moment, what this article says is in the Evening Standard that there's a shortage of workers. I think we're all facing that, whether it's fruit pickers, it's abattoir staff, it's lorry drivers. We're facing high inflation. Fuel prices are high, feed prices are going up, fertilizers going up. And then there's also this call from the National Farmers Union in the UK to say, well, we need to be more self-sufficient. That actually we should be aiming for 60% plus of self-sufficiency as being an important part of the future. And that will then lead to sustainability. But I think the key thing for me that is probably coming through quite strongly is they're saying to the government, the UK government, and I'm sure, again, around Europe is the same, come on, guys, get a strategy. Please put together a strategy where you're joining up the focus on farmers, logistics, security, sustainability, and actually have a cohesive strategy. And I was in a conversation with someone earlier in the week about electric car manufacturing, and they had the same conversation about, so where's the strategy for the supply chain? And I think this is just another example of that. So I think it's a really interesting piece about the whole supply chain piece. But what's your thoughts on that, Nico? What's your thoughts on the challenges that I suppose this supply chain is facing, but probably very common across other areas?
Yeah, because of our appliances, we are on two ways we look at sustainability as a whole. It is within our DNA because of our appliances. And there is a nice connection concerning the article that you show, that we are not looking into the food itself, but we are preserve the food within our refrigerators, of course. And within our programs of developing new refrigerators, this is a very important point. It is nice that we buy so much food and so on, but how do we preserve it, and how do we, and we of our responsibility, create appliances that can support the customer, we all as ourselves, by preserve it in a better way, to prevent us to buy too much, and to make us aware of the influence that we can have in this area on sustainability and on our planet as a whole. And it is within our DNA of Electrolux not only to look at sustainability in the distribution that we can imagine, but it is first of all within our appliances, make them spend less on energy or whatsoever, to preserve food in a better way, to provide you with clean air in your living environment. So that's also sustainable. Besides that, we focus on our premises, having solar panels on our roof and that kind of stuff. And then the third pillar is our, in this case, distribution. It is all over the world. We are in 150 markets, so we are all over the world with our with our markets, with our brands, but also with our presence. And we really drive the sustainable agenda. So based on the alignment in Paris and the United Nations, we really drive this agenda on these 3 pillars. So that's the way how we contribute.
I think it's, you made a very interesting link there, didn't you, to, because I was talking about the sort of food supply chain, and what you're saying is, well, it's actually, it's the whole supply chain. It's not just the food getting to where people have it, but actually it's then storing it, keeping it, making it sort of, so we're not wasting it as we go through. So it is that full end-to-end supply chain that Electrolux is playing a key part of, and maybe something I hadn't really reflected on when we were going that through.
Yeah, and also making people aware of. So we provide them with recipes in the right way, not to spoil too much food, but really instruct people how to preserve their food in the right way, that you would not be necessary to throw it away or whatsoever. And also we support several initiatives in this area. For instance, there are restaurants who create totally new menus out of stuff that is outdated or almost outdated, but still good. And we support that kind of initiatives of these kind of restaurants. So we're really taking sustainability as I have to say it differently. We really take our responsibility for the planet as one of our first priorities, and it is also within our vision and mission to preserve the planet in the right way. We have only one, so.
Yeah, no, and I was just looking at some of the comments in the chat, because I think Trudy's talking about sort of food waste being a terrible thing, but I think Ashley Cook's come in with a comment about the fact that would mean the C-suite has to change from cost to value, and bring in much more transformational stuff. And maybe from a Electrolux perspective, it sounds like that's very much you're looking at the total circular supply chain, you're looking at the total aspect of it, unless maybe he's focused specifically on the cost elements associated with it.
Exactly. And because we are able to provide this, it is interesting. Nevertheless, of course, at the end of the day, we look at our footprint in total, because we are all over the place. The footprint is quite significant on one hand, or the other hand. When you look at our appliances itself that we create, using less electrification, using less water. Nowadays, we do not wash everything on a high degree, but our washing machines can manage lower degrees that really save in this way water, to prevent or wasting them.
Yeah,
so we
great.
really take up all our total influence to make to preserve the planet as a whole.
Yeah, that's great. So Nico, thank you for that. What I'd like to do is bring in the other two guests that are going to join us today. So if Keith Hallam could join us, he's the Group Supply Chain Director of Hillary's Blinds and Curtains, I think it is. But welcome to you, Keith, and I'll let you do an intro in a minute. And also we've got Alistair Sheraton as well, who's an independent consultant in supply chain and e-commerce. So welcome to you, Alistair. So thank you both for joining us. So I'll let you both do a very quick intro to yourself. So Keith, maybe quick intro to yourself, and maybe those who don't know Hillary's. I'm sure Hillary's, but just
certainly. So I'm Keith Hallam. I'm the Group Supply Chain at Hillary's. They're a windows furnishings business, so blinds, curtains, shutters, a national brand. It's a sort of a Dutch-American business. I've actually been with the business just over 6 months, and my career prior to that, in relevance to this subject, has all been in food and drink, and has come from an accountancy background writing initially, but spent the last sort of 20 years or so leading supply chains, not just in the UK, but across Europe and across some areas of the globe as well. So I'm very interested and of some relevance into this subject.
That's great. Thank you, Keith. And Alistair?
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. So I've worked mainly in retail, e-commerce, and B2B as a supply chain director for companies like Woolworths, Travis Perkins, and Jewson. I now work independently, and I also teach at Cranfield School of Management and Sheffield Hallam University Business School.
Which is why you're sat in a library with all the books behind you, just so we know just what a learned fellow you are, Alistair. So,
Duncan.
So welcome to you. So let's come back to this sort of focus on the food supply chain first, and then we'll come back onto the focus on sustainability and distribution piece that we want to get to. But I mean, Keith, Alistair, you sort of heard the discussion we were having there about the supply chain challenges, but also the strategy. What's your thoughts and perspectives on this?
Yeah, let me go first. I mean, I think you made sort of two brief things here. One, I think, is a brief comment here, is it? And going back to Nico's point there around it's supply chains of supply chains of supply chains that really matter. I think what we all tend to do is focus on either in our own individual businesses an area of the supply chain. So, working out CO2s, less mileage, and generally as supply chain people, we become we concentrate on efficiencies. We concentrate on reducing costs and maximizing aspects there. But it's actually, for me, and one of the most powerful things is working in the customer supply chain and then directly to the consumer, and then obviously beyond, but then also prior in your supply chain to suppliers' supply chains, and understanding that rather than just thinking I'm purchasing shrink wrap and plastics and cases and bottles and whatever it is. The second thing is, which I think is a really, really key point here, which I think Ashley made in the chat, is around the element here of cost and the business value that it drives, because obviously we all need to be profitable business. You can't do things at a loss. You can do certain things at a loss. You can't do everything at a loss, because that's not a sustainable piece. So I think there's lots and lots to do here, and certainly one of the things I've introduced in the time I've been in this non-food business, but certainly is literally about doing more. Every little step helps, every little change helps. You can't save the world by tomorrow, but what you can do is make it a better place and a longer future for everybody beyond our generations, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Keith, isn't it? Because as often, I think we were having a chat yesterday. I said, there's a couple of organisations I'm working with where they seem to be still planning what they want to do, as against getting on and doing some of it. And one of the things that we did a survey as SIPS probably 2 or 3 months ago now, and it was one of those questions about the commitment to net zero and are you there yet? And a lot of organisations say, well, I think either 15-20% still don't have a plan, or they're not really discussing the plan yet, and yet their companies are making commitments to achieve something, but they actually still haven't quite got started. And I think that's a really important point about getting those first steps underway, isn't it, as you go forward?
Yeah, and I think just to build on that point, Duncan, would be to not, I would say, virtue signal. You can't virtue signal that we will be something. We will be the best ever in a number of years' time. You have to understand, if I'm going to be, people talk about being net zero by 2050. That's a long time away. Yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing by 23, 25? What are you doing by 30? So those steps along the way, whether you're going from 1% to 2%, that's a big step. 2% to 5%, they're big steps. So, I'm a big believer in actually getting something done rather than talking about what you would do.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And Alistair, what's your input here?
Yeah, I think going back to sort of the food supply chain, I think one thing I'd pick up on is the interesting question about cost and value. And at Cranfield, sometimes we sort of talk about the demand chain rather than supply chain, which is a reminder that we do need to think of the consumer who drives demand. We can sometimes push and promote demand or promote sales. And I think, part of the whole food supply chain issues stem from customer expectations, and consumers now have been trained expertly by the fantastic service that supermarkets give to expect any product, whatever the season, wherever it comes from, to expect incredibly low cost and perfect product, and all of which drives enormous cost, enormous waste. It drives down, driver wages, the wages of people harvesting and picking, which is what drives the need for seasonal workers, and hence we have the Brexit problems. So I think, the answer isn't clearly put up the prices and make everyone pay, but I think there is something to be said for even the responsibility of supply chain professionals. Can we influence that debate? And you've seen it in some areas, like eggs now. More and more supermarkets are now saying all eggs must be kind of made either free range or in much better conditions. So basically, caged birds laying eggs is becoming a thing of the past. Now that pushes up costs fractionally, but clearly the consumer accepts that and understands the trade-off. And I think there might be a time, give it a few years, when supermarkets may start to take the stance to say, well, we won't fly stuff from across the world out of season. We can make those products perfectly well in the UK. We can grow them when the season is here, and out of season, I'm afraid you're going to have to do without them unless you want to kind of pay a heck of a lot of money to get it from some very specialist place. So I think there's that sort of end-to-end perspective, which I think is important and which we can still influence even as supply chain professionals.
Thanks, Alistair. And I think that's a really important point, isn't it, about the consumer driving behaviours as well, and the decisions that we all take on that basis. And as you say, while there's, I suppose this article was calling on the government for strategy, there's certain things that we as consumers can do ourselves to help to support and to maybe make some of the choices we need to make as we go forward. So thank you for that. I think there's a question has come in and actually linked to that, and we'll get into sustainability and distribution in a minute. I think there's a question from James Smith. So what are your thoughts on the shift towards green logistics distribution? Is it possible to make greener choices across the supply chain, including storage, order processing, packaging, and final mile delivery? That's a simple question to answer on a Wednesday afternoon. I mean, what's your
well, certainly there certainly are. I mean, already some supermarkets are taking steps to try and become package free. And actually, it's interesting. I did there was some of my students at Sheffield Hallam Business School were doing a project for Asda, which was actually just researching what Asda and other supermarkets are doing in refillables. So you go in with your own container and fill it up with dry pasta, coffee, tea, whatever it might be. So that is starting to grow. There's a lot of independent stores doing that, but the big supermarkets are starting to look at it. And there's an investment in the filling machinery, but it's not just produce, it's also, fairy liquid, washing up liquid, shampoos, take a container, fill it up under a sort of, a dispenser, and it gets weighed. So already that again is moving along. I mean, funny enough, we're sort of going back to things of decades ago when you went to your corner shop and they'd give you a paper bag and put the produce in it. But again, there's some very interesting things to take out a lot of that intermediate packaging totally, and clearly that's big potential.
Yeah, and to my opinion, when you look at distribution, we all know there's a lot of pressure on distribution at the moment. It has to be in time. It has to be, of course, logically on the logistics side in place and in time and in the right spot and so on, but also the track and trace and so on. But sustainability provide you also with possibilities. To my opinion, when you look at the pressure in distribution, the shippers should take the lead, and Electrolux is doing so, take the lead in pushing the market toward a more sustainable way of distribution. And the opportunities that I see is, for instance, having the e-trucks in place, and I had the pleasure to drive one myself. It is so much easier to drive such a truck. And the outcome of that is that the stress, the people who are involved in this, is so much less at the end of the day. The trucks are more driver friendly with the cameras, so for security, but also with a lower step in, so they do not have to climb 20 times into the truck anymore. The steering is so much more relaxed and the shaking is so much less, but also the noise. So at the end of the day, these steps into some more sustainable distribution gives also the possibility of so much more people to step into this market. And so it is, besides the fact that it is very important to contribute in this way, it gives also some opportunities.
Right.
And again, I think the shippers should make the first step, like you already said, Keith, really put some steps into the right direction, and that's what is a fact, and that is a target to the market itself.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that point, obviously, you know, I'd say worked in a lot of food and drink industries, and they've probably been very, very country specific. So there's not been a lot actually coming in, apart from certain packaging or materials or certain ingredients to come in to be made into the finished product. One of the things that is in the business I'm in the minute is, you know, there's a lot of the material, and there's an element of either partly finished goods or some finished goods that are actually sourced across, like you say, there's a lot of sea logistics, a lot of air logistics, which takes a lot of focus, a lot of noise, but that's not the final delivery. So, you know, I think a lot of supply chain logistics talks about the execution to the customer bit rather than actually getting it through to the logistics piece. And there are obviously, like you say, those large logistics businesses that work on, you know, the biofuels, and they're really working very hard on measuring, because I do think that's the first part here, making sure you've got the right governance, right measurement factor before you then start working out exactly what your plan is, or doing something differently. But there's loads and loads of opportunities through the whole supply chain here, really lots and lots, and it's about everybody's trying to do something, which I think is, you know, credible, but there's still lots to go at.
Keith, I was going to say, picking up on the point of measuring, though, I mean, it is a really important one. I think, and I was musing about this, thinking actually funny about food. Now, in something like food, I think everyone has recognized for many, many years, you know, calories on food per portion per 100 grams is kind of well understood, and I think is pretty consistent. I mean, there's clearly always going to be examples you can find which aren't quite accurate and so on. But I think the problem with supply chains is just no one's got any idea, really, have we, of the true energy or carbon footprint of a particular product. And I think, you know, a case in point is if you're thinking of, you know, kind of, you're thinking of, Nico, your home country, you know, you pass the enormous greenhouses in the Netherlands, doing a fantastic job, but obviously using a lot of energy. So, you know, if you buy a tomato from the Netherlands versus a tomato, I don't know, from Kenya, actually, which is the better one? You know, the one from Kenya has been flown, and you think, oh my goodness me, that's terrible. But the one in the Netherlands may have been, you know, drinking up energy from all that lighting for 3 months before it's harvested. And I've no idea the answer. And I think the other aspect of that is thinking of the workers involved. Funny enough, I just did a little calculation, and for something like a worker driving 10 miles each day, even in an electric car, would be creating 2 megawatts or using 2 megawatts of energy a year, which is pretty massive. That's a third of a ton of steel. You know, it takes up that amount of energy. You know, you have a worker in, I don't know, China, in a factory there, cycling to work, well, the energy footprint is pretty well zero. Similarly, you know, the home that they're living in. So it's a real question with measurement, just how far back do you go, what do you consider? And I you know, there are no standards yet. You know, I guess we'll get there eventually, but there's some big questions there.
I think that's probably comes to the, I mean, we had some specific topics we're going to talk about as a panel, but I think you probably just nicely moved into that, Alistair, because actually
jumped ahead.
No, I was going to say, because actually what we are doing is saying, well, how would you drive sustainability? And what you're saying there is one of the things is measuring and getting that baseline of what's there. But I think we've also picked up a few other comments already from Nico. You were talking about, you know, distribution has to start by looking at it and looking at the whole end-to-end piece. And Keith, you already touched on it, saying, look, you know, start somewhere. You know, choose one element and start as you go through. But I think it's there's a question that just came up from Eshwar. Says traditionally, while distribution network is planned, there is more emphasis on cost optimization. What factors have to be considered to have a sustainable distribution and have a balance on cost for service? So I don't know if you sort of quite get the theme there, but I think you're saying, you know, instead of just focusing on cost and the lowest possible cost, it's cost and service and the whole sort of value that's in distribution. And maybe Nico, you probably touched on that already, I think, in terms of your response on they have to start somewhere. These people have got to start really looking at the way that they do distribution, both service, but particularly sustainability in there as well.
Yeah, and of course, at the end of the day, we are all companies, so it's about cost on one hand. But on the other hand, as said, it gives also opportunities sometimes. And people are looking in different possibilities because of being more sustainable. And those opportunities we have to grab. Like I said, concerning the e-trucks, it's more easy to drive them. But also concerning other topics, people can be very creative if they are pushed a little bit in a certain direction. And our COVID situation is proving that. And also in supply chain, we really push the boundaries at the moment to cope with all the targets, but also the struggle that we have, and that create creativity. When we look at costs, more and more, because of our knowledge of the total end-to-end supply chain, we can also have a better view on the total of the impact on the total process of these costs. For instance, we drive a lot within Europe by train, and more because of the situation on our big seas, we also drive the train from China into Europe. And I can tell you it is quite expensive, but the container by ship is even more expensive, takes much more time. And although you will never suffer from having a refrigerator one day too late, your food will suffer, but you will not. Our promise to our customers is suffering if we order or if we deliver too late to our customers. So the pressure on our total throughput is there, although it is not something like vegetables or something like that. Nevertheless, the pressure is there. So also the total calculation of using the train instead of the ship, although it's more expensive, but it is more sustainable and that kind of stuff, having a better inside view on the end-to-end makes possibilities there, and possibility makes it make that we are able to make this decision into these kind of possibilities.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Keith, bringing you in here, because I know you said just before we started this session that at the moment at Hillary is your peak season in terms of getting sort of deliveries out. So presumably you've also got the same challenge there in terms of that balance between getting it to the customer when they want it before Christmas, the cost associated, but then making the right choices around sustainability and the distribution methods as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, I think logistics around the globe has obviously gone astronomical. I mean, it's been one of the big highest inflationary areas. There's limited players at it. And unfortunately, due to lots of different things and Brexit, Suez Canal being two big ones in the last couple of years, there's things that have influenced those factors. But it's been critical on, through decisions through the last few months on speed and accuracy. So, the use of air versus sea, which is astronomically more expensive, but also on top of the cost has these downsides and that detrimental effect to the environment and the sustainability aspect of that. So there's a very, very fine balance, and it comes back to this sort of cost service versus aspect. And in the short term, you can make some very poor decisions. As long as you're not making those poor decisions in the longer term, I think that's really important.
That's a good point. So there are times where you maybe have to do a compromise, but as long as you learn from it and you look at it better for the next time round.
Yeah, and I think that's all about, demand sensing, and understanding what that is. And you know what? Sometimes it's also about saying no. So, having the decision that isn't about full service, as supply chain professionals, we're always measured on that. How do you get to 100%? We all know we can't get to 100%, and it's a degree of inaccuracy. You get to 100%, whether it's 90, 95, 98, 98.5, 99, whatever the number is, right? So you're always concentrating on that. So it's knowing that you have that in your degree of inaccuracy in that service measurement, and knowing that you can't be everything to everybody all of the time. And I think that's really important. So being brave to say no sometimes has certainly been, in joining the business 6-7 months ago, I've had to have a few of those conversations. No, that's not the right thing for us to do. And it's not just about cost. Some of it's about that's not the right thing to do. And driving an environmental journey in things like materials, when you're asking about metals, when you're asking about, the use of, hemp, the use of bamboo, things that can actually really be quite positive messaging. And I think the critical thing is employees and consumers are all asking these questions more and more and more now. And they're not the eco warriors. It's part of the general agenda now, not a minority agenda for me.
Yeah.
Perhaps if I can pick up on that, I mean, it's really interesting, this whole point back to Eshwar's question about cost and service. And I had quite a similar thing where I did some work for a major cosmetics retailer a few years ago. And in that situation, actually, the marketing and sales had decided that for Black Friday, they were suddenly going to lower the minimum order cost, and they lowered it. And they hadn't actually communicated with supply chain. And we immediately saw that the order values just plummeted. The number of orders and the sales were still about the same, but there wasn't even the debate. And I think you're making a really good point, Keith, that I think, again, for supply chain professionals, we can have that debate with marketing and sales and say, look, this is crazy. If you have a really low e-commerce minimum order, you're going to add a lot of cost, and it's not good environmentally, because people just, as soon as they hit the small order, think, oh, that'll do, and then an hour later they think, oh, I forgot to order that, I better order that as well. And I think a really massive example of that is Amazon Prime, which is, I hate to think the amount of packaging and energy and vehicle miles, electric or not, they create, because once you're on Amazon Prime, you just think, oh, I just need nothing. I just do that, £1, yeah, sure, I just order it. Along comes a huge cardboard box with some tiny product in. If you're not on Amazon Prime, you think, oh, actually, I've got a few things. Oh, now I've hit £20. Fine, I'll order them. So I think, again, there's responsibility. And I think a third point on that, which really, again, maybe the government should be doing something and actually say there's got to be a minimum 50p transaction tax or something. These new services are saying, oh, I need a lemon for my gin and tonic. I can't be bothered to walk down the road. I'll order one up. And I don't care about paying £1 extra to have some desperate sort of unicorn business deliver it because they're going to get some amazing valuation. But again, it's terrible. I mean, some of it's on pedal bicycles, I know, but I bet a lot of it's on people buzzing around on mopeds, belching out CO2 emissions into the cities just to deliver to some lazy customer who can't be bothered to walk down the road to their local supermarket. So a rant on all the opportunities to handle sustainability as consumers and as people who can influence consumers.
I think you've just sort of shamed us all, Alistair, because I was just about to crack open a gin and tonic. I probably need to leave it now, and I'm going to ring my wife as soon as I finish, and that's to cancel our Amazon Prime subscription. So, but no, I think you make a really valid point, and it's some of the comments that have been coming through about consumers making decisions. I mean, we touched on it a bit earlier about seasonal produce. The fact that actually I think Alistair has sort of made the comment or the question about sort of retraining people about what's in season, what isn't, and the choices you make around that. You made one there about selecting how you get stuff delivered. So there's actually a piece there about driving people in that direction. One of the other things we want to also touch on was about technology. So are there technological solutions that can also help in this space that can really drive forward this sort of focus on sustainability and distribution? And I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Are there solutions out there that people should be using more, or is this an area that's still a lot more to do?
I don't mind just to interject in here, because I think one of the things we're very good at in supply chains and in business protocols are raising, I would say, authority levels. As you go from sort of a junior manager, middle manager, senior manager, a junior manager can sign off 1,000, a middle manager can sign off 10,000, and then the C-suite sign off the million. Yeah, so we're all good at that authorization on value. there are some very niche businesses at the moment actually doing that based upon decision-making structures, based upon poorer environmental and sustainability type of questions. So do you realize there's an impact here? We're certainly introducing that into things like capital expenditure, when you're making those type of decisions, but it's quite a niche area at the minute, because at the minute it's not an evaluation. We're very clear on cost and benefit analysis, aren't we? And we have been tuned for that for so many years, probably before my career lifetime in that sense. But having that as a decision-making process is, what is the impact for CO2? What's the impact for my carbon neutral? Almost asking the same handful of questions that you'd want it to be. There are some niche businesses that will come in and create that and structure that for you in those. But at the moment, it's such a low level of maturity that but I do think that's the way it's going to go. We're going to end up having that as part of our decision-making process, as well as cost and people.
I mean, in terms of technology, I'd sort of say definitely technology has got a huge place in this. And Nico, you were mentioning your enthusiasm for the e-trucks, which clearly is going to be a great thing as generally sort of vehicles will be replaced by electric over the coming decades. So I think there's sort of almost two types of technology. One is the technology to just be more efficient. So that's really effective vehicle scheduling, and certainly those home deliveries now, it's just unbelievable. The poor guys are kind of doing 150 deliveries on a shift, or 200. I mean, they're just belting out the parcels. So actually, the individual footprint of each delivery is becoming incredibly small. Take it a step further and replace that vehicle from being a combustion engine vehicle with an electric vehicle. You've got an even bigger saving. So I think there's examples like that. Similarly, picking in a warehouse, great systems, great positioning and locating of products within the warehouse, fast movers, slow movers, put them in the perfect positions. That can mean that the pick routes are really efficient. So that just reduces the labor and the workforce. And clearly, look, there's society issues there, but I'm focusing on the sort of the actual sustainability and efficiency of supply chains. But if you can reduce the workforce in warehouses, clearly that's good for sustainability. It reduces the impact of workforces. People driving to the warehouse, as I mentioned, could have a big, heavy footprint. But then the second point is, can you then go a step further and then use more automation, more robotics, etc., which of course we're all increasingly doing in supply chains as well. So I think there's those two types of technology, both of which can really have an impact. Yeah.
Thanks, Alistair. Nico?
Yeah, it's techniques. It is also digitalization. It is also awareness of the people by the service that they are provided nowadays, and do they really need it? It already begins with your cashier's slip at the grocery. Do you really need that, or can you do it without? Now, in distribution, it's the way bill, or what kind of paper that we are confronting this distribution with. One of the developments is, of course, the eCMR. So in a digital way, having the information available that we are used to have printed on paper on a daily basis, but also making customers aware of the fact that they sometimes ask for something that they do not really need it. The instruction with our appliances, for instance, you can have it in a digital way via YouTube in a very easy way presented to you. So to be aware, and it starts with us as people. We are all customers, consumers. So we should be aware already about our footprint, and when we start ourselves, then for sure we can make some steps also within our companies.
And I think that's your comments about awareness, and probably Keith, you're making the same comment, that actually helping us to understand is a big step forward there, isn't it? And that's sort of Alistair, you were talking about how much emissions we have from driving to work and back. It's those sort of aspects of good data that allows us to make the right decisions going forward. Is going to be a really interesting piece. And whether there's technology solutions, but also just availability of data, visibility of data is going to be really an aspect for all of us, I think, as we go forward. And just on we've got a few other questions that have come in, so I just want to try and pick up a couple of them in the time we've got left. So Ashley's been Ashley Cook's been adding quite a lot of questions. I'm not going to cover them all, Ashley, but thank you for some of them. One of this is about it says about as organizations look to rebalance their overall globalized manufacturing and supply chain to include more local content. So that's basically local sourcing versus global sourcing. To what extent is the logistics sector looking at this as an opportunity to deliver greener logistics? I know you talked about your e-trucks, Nico. We don't want to go back to e-trucks again, but obviously that's one example that we're all going to go out and have a drive of one over Christmas. But I mean, the greener logistics piece.
Yeah, I can react to this. And for sure, we're rebalancing our manufacturing as well, but also our total supply chain in that order. And looking at local logistics, or maybe on a smaller scale, we actively support and drive local initiatives, also by startups, for instance, to come up with some solutions. And that is not only within our appliances, but for sure also in our processes and our supply chain. So yes, this rebalancing is there. We have to, also forced by COVID, to be clear, but also because of our footprint on the planet. So and by supporting these local initiatives and maybe smaller suppliers in that case, we try to cope with this local logistics footprint. Yes. So I can confirm, yes, that is the case, and we actively look into this.
Okay. And as you say, that sort of innovation from the startups, from the smaller suppliers, is often the ones that really brings that innovation to this party, but actually some great new ideas that come through. So thanks for that, Nico. Alistair, Keith, any other comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll sort of pick up again that there's clearly big decisions about where to source from, but I think the other thing is really understanding the true footprint of transport and actually, kind of again sort of interesting facts that a container coming from the Far East by ship, actually the amount of CO2 emission per ton of product or per cubic meter of product is comparable to a driving a few hundred miles. So actually, if you've got a factory in Spain and you say, oh, well, from Spain, clearly we're just going to drive it up to the UK, that could have just as much emissions as actually shipping it from a factory in China by sea, if there's not big road miles in China. So as with all these things, understanding the true footprint, if that's our big focus nowadays, which it should be, it is really important. And as I mentioned before, I think it's also understanding the true footprint, and that can mean that a factory in China where people cycle into the office, cycle into the factory and so on, and have smaller homes and haven't got air conditioning blasting out as they might in, a US factory or whatever, can clearly have an impact. But equally, it may be the other way around. It may be that actually the emissions, the energy production in China is dirty and much worse. So there's a lot to understand to really know the full picture. But clearly there are opportunities, and the train example is a great one of those sort of Far East to Europe trains. Amazing. That they're there, and that's a great example where you can reduce the footprint even more with long distance transport.
Yeah, and I think as well, building on that, I think going back to those who say those Far Eastern supply chains as examples, and I think it puts into that local piece that you mentioned there, Duncan, as well. That I think everybody wants to have that localness or that sense of localness and structure. Now, whether that's in your street, in your town, in your city, in your postcode, in your country, in your Europe, in your aspect around that. I think businesses are making decisions based upon their risk, service, and cost mainly. But I think it also has the elements of those environmental aspects as well. And I think they're becoming more and more apparent, as I say, into the decisions making, and actually becoming more part of that decision process to make it more local, however local is local. But that's going to be a bigger part, I think, in the foreseeable future as well as now.
That's great, thank you. And I've got one more question because we're just about out of time. It's another one from Eshwar, so thank you, Eshwar. Can regulatory bodies provide incentives for sustainable initiatives in supply chain distribution? You can either say yes or no, but maybe a little bit more than yes.
Yes. Yes, they can. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, they already do. Let's face it. I mean, you pay tax on fuel. You don't pay tax on electricity to nearly the same degree. So straight away, there's an incentive: move to an e-truck rather than a combustion engine truck. So absolutely, they've got the ability, and it's the balance of how much state control do you want to free enterprise versus how much do you want to nudge and so on. So yeah, it's just a question of how far they want to go with some of these things.
But just to support this, we from Electrolux are also involved in the World Forum, World Economic Forum, and out of that there is now an investigation going on the charging point within Europe for e-trucks, because an e-truck is nice, but they have to be charged, and it is quite impacting your supply chain as a whole and the planning for it especially. So those initiatives are taken, and yes, the government and the organizations attached to that are supporting this and promoting this. Yes, for sure, to come up with a total network within Europe to make this happen. And so yes, for sure, it is important that they support.
Anything to add, Keith?
Well, the one thing I would say is that I think rather than create incentives, I think there'll be governmental bodies that will create more of a fine process if you don't comply to a certain level. So I'm not too sure that's the incentive. It was just more around there's a good cost to a business if you don't.
Carrot and stick.
But actually, we know that both work, don't we? Because I mean, there's an incentive to do the right thing, but actually, there's penalties if you don't. And I think that's back to that balance, isn't it? And I suppose, Alistair, back to your comment about what sort of a society do we want to live in terms of how much is controlled. And we're probably, I was just reflecting on the rebellion in the House of Commons last night of Tory MPs deciding they don't want to be controlled anymore, versus the need to actually drive some of the right behaviours going forward. So, but I'm not going to get into politics. That's probably a whole separate session that I'm not supposed to get into. So, unfortunately, guys, we're out of time. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I certainly learned a lot from you all. Thank you in terms of the focus on this topic of sustainability and distribution and your views and your comments. It's been great to have the discussion with you today. So I think sort of Keith, Nico, Alistair, thank you very much for your contribution today. And thanks very much to the people who are asking the questions, to some of the stuff in chat that was coming through. I think I noticed that the supply chain elf is going to deliver a lemon to me so I can have my gin and tonic later. So thank you for that, Daniel. That was great of you. But I think it is important that we sort of continue to talk about these topics and these issues as they go through. And we also had some great questions, particularly from Alistair and Eswar. But I think, as Alistair already had a mug from a previous episode, and you can only have one mug, Alistair. Sorry, Alistair. I meant Ashley. Then I think this one should go to Eswar in terms of a mug for you. So congratulations on your questions, and thank you for stimulating the discussion in the way you did. So we'll make sure there's a mug on its way to you. But anyway, as I said, so Keith, Nico, Alistair, thank you very much for your contributions today. It's been great. And for everyone else who's joined, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Supply Chain Talk. We're not going to be back until middle of January. We're going to have a break up over Christmas. But when we do come back, we're going to talk about the returns, the nightmare after Christmas, which is going to be middle of January. And I don't know if any of you want to come back and talk about that, but probably not Nico and Keith, because I'm not sure how much of your stuff gets returned after Christmas. But that should be very...
Hopefully not a lot.
No, exactly.
That
should be a really interesting episode. So anyway, thanks everyone for your time today. Keith, Nico, Alistair, thanks very much for your time. It's been great.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.